Hi, I'm Susan Shank from Shift Your Thinking, and I'm here today to talk about anxiety and learning differences. Now, you might be thinking, what am I talking about with learning differences? Well, you might know about dyslexia, you might know about attention deficits, or any other learning disorder, or possibly disability. There's that term too, which I don't really like. Those are terms that are about looking at learning differences. It's all about how we learn and how we actually focus in on information and process it. So that's a learning difference. But how does it relate to anxiety? Well, I know firsthand how it relates, having a learning difference myself. So let's walk through the three things that you need to consider when it comes to learning differences and anxiety. First of all, learning differences can be stressful. I mean, you have to do things in a way that really isn't your strength. When you are learning information for the first time and it just doesn't make sense to you, you can't read it, whatever it is that your child or yourself is dealing with when it comes to the event of learning, and you can't learn that way, that is very stressful, particularly when you have other people doing something similar right beside you, or you're being requested to do something that is quite difficult for you to do initially. As soon as you understand your learning difference, then that stress level can come down because you understand your learning and what's needed, and you can say, hey, I'm going to use that calculator because I can't do math in my head, or I need to use spell check. It just helps me to get my information down so everyone can read it. You have that confidence in saying, this is how I learn. Then that stress level can come down. And honestly, when the stigma of learning differences starts to fall and we start to shatter that some more, then the stress of learning differences is also going to fade. But for now, the reality is learning differences leads to stress because there is shame in not being able to do things the way other people do it. And we have to be able to walk through that and allow our kids to be okay with how they are learning, and also to pull them out of that fight and flight that they're actually in when they're in what they consider a very stressful or shameful situation. So knowing that learning differences isn't just about learning, but it's all the experience around that that leads to the possible stress that your child or you are dealing with. And that actually can walk into the anxiety, because anxiety is basically stress or fear, right? And when you are fearful of having a bad experience with reading, then you are continuously in the cycle of anxiety and fight and flight. The second point I want you to know when it comes to anxiety and learning differences is anxiety can show up in a number of different ways. Now, we already talked about the fight and flight that sort of could be happening with your child or yourself, where you're constantly, I gotta either freeze or I gotta run or I gotta come out swinging, basically, is what happens when you get into that fight and flight response. And so your body is physically responding to the anxiety. This can lead to headaches, tummy aches, can lead to not feeling well, rapid heart rate. So there's a number of things with anxiety that shows up in physical responses. And this really leads to your child maybe even not even wanting to eat, or they won't use the washroom at school. So these are sort of real responses to anxiety, but we may not even view them as anxiety because of the fact that they are just everyday habits, right? Everyone gets a headache, everyone can get a tummy ache, but when it's happening on a consistent basis, then this needs to be paid attention to. The next thing that can happen is obviously having trouble going to sleep. Your child may not be able to go to sleep. They might have difficulties relaxing or even paying attention to something. So the anxiety is there and they can't focus because they're too worried about what am I going to be asked to do next. So they don't even focus on what's happening in the classroom. Some other things that are really common when it comes to anxiety, and particularly learning differences, is refusal to go to school. They don't want to go to school. It's too much for them. They, they have, again, all the physical symptoms, tummy aches, headaches, those types of things. Now, anxiety, you might have irritable sort of habits or grouchiness or anger. You can have sensitivity and crying and meltdowns. So all these different behaviors and emotions can come out with anxiety. It's not just clear-cut fear. it can show up in so many ways, and that's why you have to be aware that anxiety is going to show up in a number of different ways. Your child might shut down, they might be really quiet, they may not want to talk to somebody. So these are all anxiety, and sometimes it gets a little hard because you actually think it could be just your child that's shy, or they're just refusing to go to school because they just want to stay with you. And so all these little things you think are part of their life until you pull the anxiety out and you start to analyze it and you start to help them to work through it, and then you start to realize, oh my goodness, this anxiety was actually causing the sleeping problems all along, right? Okay. So the third point is you have to start looking at or addressing both the learning difference and the anxiety at the same time. So the learning difference, basically, you're going to be looking at what are their challenges with learning, what are they asked to do in their grade right now, and how can you help them to walk through that so that they feel comfortable with how they learn. And with the anxiety piece, that's going to come down also as you help them with their learning, but you're also going to look at, can I help them use the washroom at school so they feel safe? Can we make sure that they're eating certain foods? Is it better for them to be in a smaller setting to help them to eat? All those different things. So you want to address both concerns at the same time to help your child walk through until they gain that confidence with their learning. And hopefully that anxiety is managed and comes down. So I hope you enjoyed these few tips, and I will be sharing more content with you again.